Okay, so in this video I wanted to quickly show you how to gather high-resolution 3D topography services using the USGS map viewer and a plugin for Grasshopper. So I'm going to go to my web browser and I'm going to search for USGS map viewer. And then click on this first link here. And this is like a mapping portal that will allow me, so I'll click on launch to download all kinds of great information. Before you zoom to your actual site, just click on the data download because that'll take you to another page actually. And then what we'll do is we'll zoom down into where the site is. So we want to gather topography information about this area. So what I'll do is zoom to a level where we can kind of see the whole area we'd want to collect information for. And then over here on the left, I'm going to click Extent. And I will click and drag to create a selection boundary. And all this does is it creates an area that I'll search for data. Next, I want to scroll down in this list on the left and click on this elevation source data. So rather than the elevation products, click on the source data. And then the data that I want is called DEM rather than LiDAR. So I'll check DEM and uncheck LiDAR. Then scroll back up and hit search products. And it should give us, basically all of the rectangles where we have data for that are within our boundary or touching our boundary. So one of the ways to kind of keep track, I know in this case we actually have pretty high resolution data. We have a ton of little squares that make this up. So we can stitch those together. One way you can do that is you can hit this little footprint button. So it'll show you which one, obviously you can see on the right there. And so if I wanted to get the 3D topography for that rectangle, I can go ahead and click on download link. And so that'll download a TIFF file. If you look over here on these little thumbnails, it's basically kind of like a height map. So it's a grayscale image that represents elevation. Next we need to get a plugin for Grasshopper that'll interpret that into a 3D surface or a mesh. So then I'll click on New Tab, and over here I'll search Bison for Grasshopper. So this is a free plugin. We just have to download it and install it. It's on Food for Rhino. If you're not familiar with this website, you should be able to log in the top right with your Rhino, same login you use for your Rhino license. Or if you are using a school computer, I think you can also just make a free account. And then scrolling down here, so I think we want to click on this last one in the list. It says beta release, and then go ahead and click download. All right, then I'll open up my downloads folder. So it's going to download a zip file. What I want to make sure that I do before I try to install it is right click on that zip file, go to properties, and then hit unblock here and hit OK. And then I can right click and hit extract all. I'm not even really sure you need to do that because there's only one component here, but anyway, so once we have that extracted, next I'm going to go ahead and open Rhino, and I'm going to start Grasshopper. So just type the word Grasshopper in the command line there. Okay, and once that opens, we can go to File, Special Folders, and Components folder. And that should open a folder, which is where we want to paste that Bison file. So just go ahead, copy it, then paste it in that folder. It's already in there, so I won't actually paste it, but see, that's where it should go. And then what we need to do is restart Rhino. So I'll close Grasshopper, I'll close Rhino, and I will open a new instance of Rhino. That way the plugin will appear when I load Grasshopper. And so what I want to do real quick before I open Grasshopper is just make sure I'm in the right unit. So I'll type in units, and I will go to feet. Okay, and then open Grasshopper. Okay, so once Grasshopper opens up there, if we navigate in our toolbar over to the right, it should be a new plugin or a new menu that's appeared for our Bison plugin. And then our life is actually very simple from here. So if we go to this little mesh section, I think is what it's called, and then click on this component import mesh DEM. It's going to ask us for a few pieces of information. One of them is the file path. To create a file path, we just can go back to our first parameters tab, and under primitive, hit this component file path. That allows us just to specify where a file is saved on our computer. So go to select one, go to where you've downloaded, and click on that file that we just downloaded. Click open. So that'll plug right into the path. The next thing we have is sample. So what this does is it's kind of like resolution, and I'll show you what I mean here in a second, but our base file is like an image file. I'll just make a slider with the number 10 there. So yeah, if you're not familiar, just double click on the canvas and type in a number to make a slider. And I'll plug that into where it says sample. I think it has like a default X and Y, so it might just take a couple seconds and then it'll appear. It should appear near the origin of your file. One of the tricky things about this is it's often not the right orientation. So in this case, you can already actually see kind of where the road is cutting through in this case. And so if you remember where our actual rectangle was there, that's this road here. So it's rotated our rectangle there 90 degrees. So no big deal. All we got to do is rotate it back. But before we do that, so these squares are actually 1 kilometer rectangles. So if we wanted to, we could set that in X and Y dimensions here before we bake it. If you are going to stitch a bunch of these together to make like one big terrain, which you would need to do to make the whole hillside, it might be worth it if you're going to be loading a bunch of these in and then baking them to set the X and Y dimensions in here. Otherwise, you can also scale it once you bake it. But so because our file units are in feet, let's just look up how many feet in a kilometer. So if we set our X and Y to this number, I'll just copy it, double click on the canvas, paste that to make a number slider with that dimension. Then our X dimension, and also our Y. And one of them right now, but that's our Y dimension as well. All right, so that's quite a lot bigger as you can see. Anyway, so now, that's interesting, I wonder. It looks, all right, let's just try and bake that real quick. So 2 ways to bake things in Grasshopper. One of them is to select the component and hit insert on the keyboard. That did work. And like I said, we can rotate it 90 degrees. And let me just look at it here in perspective and see. That looks like I'm going to zoom way out. Go into shaded view. So it looks a little bit to me like actually the X and Y thing distorted it. So I'm sorry. Don't do that. Don't scale it in Grasshopper. So instead of that, we'll scale it in Rhino. So let's just quickly go back. I'm going to go ahead and just delete this X and Y. I'm not sure why that would have. Maybe because it doesn't scale to Z. Anyway, I don't know. But anyway, so just go ahead and bake it like that. And then scale it in Rhino. So I can also right click here and hit bake and put that on whatever layer I want to bake it to. And then if I change my viewport into shaded, let's see. Now there's not a whole lot of elevation change on this little square, but of course when you get to the mountain portion, there will be. And so yeah, now you could scale that if you just type in scale command, to one corner and then the other, and type in, 1 km in the command line. That should get you where you need to go. And the other thing I wanted to point out here is so this number here where we've plugged it into sample is like resolution. So I'm actually going to try and set it to like 2, and this might take a second to process here. And maybe I'll pause while it's doing that. Okay, so that's finished the process. So just to give you a sense here, I can bake this one. Maybe I'll just close Grasshopper here for a second. That file's not gone, it's just being previewed anymore. But yeah, maybe you can kind of tell based just on that how much more detail we have in the surface where I set that resolution to 2 versus 10. But of course, we also have a much more dense mesh. And so, if you were going to stitch together like whatever it is, 15 of these squares, maybe for that larger scale, you would do a lower resolution versus if you wanted to do a more zoomed in approach, you do like a higher resolution or a higher sample rate. All right, and then the last thing I wanted to touch on here is, so this does produce a mesh, a different type of geometry than like the native surfaces and so on that that Rhino uses. So if we wanted to make a surface based on this, we can use a very simple command called drape. And so we can switch over to top view here, and all we have to do is type in that command drape command line. And so we have some controls here for resolution as well. So spacing, the lower this number is, the higher the resolution will be. It's just the distance between kind of sample points. And then all we got to do is click and drag over an area, and it'll kind of like drape, almost like draping a tablecloth over our surface. It'll make a draped surface. Where on earth am I in perspective view? Okay. And so if I grab that surface there, you can see it does have a lot of points, but it also picked up, great amount of detail from our mesh. And, just in case you're wanting to do something that requires a surface, that's how you would do it. All right. So that'll conclude this video, and we'll have more on some of the other types of site analysis later.